session, I want to discuss a little bit about assessments and the way that we think about assessments and how we have kind of traditionally addressed assessments in the past and finding new ways to really use assessments to help us really be able to determine the types of skills and the real mastery that our students are showing and demonstrating to us. And sometimes traditional assessments don't really let us do that. So this whole session is just thinking about the whole concept of assessments and how we can kind of view it in a different way to really get at what we really need from our students, and that's for them to show us that they understand. And it works whether you're live in school in the classroom or whether it's virtual, whatever it might be. Just thinking about the way that we assess our students can be a lot different than what we have done in the past. So if we really take a look at what assessment means, it's by definition the evaluation of the ability of someone or something, right? So their ability, what are they able to do? And we are somehow evaluating that ability with some type of criteria. So when we think about our traditional assessments, are they really providing us with the evidence of the student's abilities? When we're looking at multiple choice tests for fill in the blank or matching and all these standardized testing, is that really showing us the ability of someone? Are our students really showing us that they actually understand? So traditional assessments in their nature really do encourage surface learning because it's all recall and recognition when we're thinking about multiple choice and fill in the blank. There's not really a lot of that deep learning that's encouraged with our traditional assessments, where it's more application and construction of knowledge, right? And if we really want to measure our students' ability and really be able to know if they understand something, then when we assess them, we really do need to be looking for more of that deep understanding. That's why students take traditional assessments and then forget everything because it was just recall recognition. They took the test, dump that, scratch that all off, wipe it down, and start again. And so it's really getting away from that to really then start to gear our students into this understanding themselves that the whole process of them learning and making meaning out of this is what's important, right? The assessment at the end is not our goal. The assessment of the end is just a way for you to demonstrate to others that I've learned all of this and understood it and made meaning out of it. Look what I know. Authentic assessments, on the other hand, right, these are based on more real world experiences, right? They are demonstrating their understanding through tasks. And if we think about what we do when we leave school and get a job in the real world, that's what we do. We come to work and we actually have to do our work, and we demonstrate that we know what we're doing and progress by our tasks, how we complete our tasks. Nowhere during our time working are we not allowed to go back and reference materials. Nowhere can we not go and ask for advice from our peers to help us solve a problem and help us complete a task. That's not the reality. So traditional assessments don't really provide opportunities for these real-world experiences. Traditional assessments are in this bubble, so there's no real demonstration of knowledge, right? They forget everything after the test. And we don't allow them most of the time when you have traditional assessment, right? Students are not allowed to reference materials. They're not allowed to talk to their peers. They can't look at anybody else's paper, right? That's considered cheating. But in reality, we don't work in this little bubble that we can't go back and reference our materials, that we can't talk to people. So rather than focusing on these traditional assessments that put children into these bubbles, let's think about ways that we can assess their knowledge and really give them the experience and the opportunity as to what they're going to be living once they get out of school. So authentic assessments really are direct measures. They are demonstrating something to you so they can apply what they're learning. It's giving you a direct measure of their understanding. It provides students opportunities to really construct meaning out of what they're learning, because it's deeper learning that's going on. There's something that they need to do with all of the information that they have been working with Now they're going to go ahead and take that and apply it in some way. The learning is occurring throughout the whole process. There is a complete integration between gathering the knowledge, making meaning out of that knowledge, and then applying that knowledge. So everything is integrated. It's not this disconnect between the teaching and the learning happens, and then the students cram everything the night before and then take the test and then done. We're moving on to the next. Everything is very broken down. This provides a more sequential, provides a more fluid process. And students begin to see the importance of the whole process, not just that end grade or that end assessment. And authentic assessments also offer multiple paths, right? Students are able to demonstrate their knowledge, to demonstrate their understanding in a lot of different ways. So it does promote student choice and voice by offering these different types of assessments. The benefits that come with authentic assessments are flexibility, right? Assessment opportunities are continuous. They don't have to happen at the end of every chapter. Here's a chapter assessment and so on. You can be flexible in the way that you assess your students throughout the whole process. There are opportunities for assessment, right? Student voice and choice are at the forefront. There's multiple paths of demonstration, providing paths for all students to excel in some way. There's this reduce of test anxiety, right? There's those students that with these traditional tests, this standardized environment, get very nervous. And so they don't perform as well as they could. And it may not be because they don't understand the material. They may know the material, but they just can't do it when they're in these testing environments. And so we can move away from this pass and fail mentality to instill in our students into a more relaxed assessment environment where they can really demonstrate their knowledge. They feel that they have a voice in demonstrating their knowledge, and they're not afraid then to take risks, right? And it's also a reduction of cheating because there are no Googleable answers in an authentic assessment. It's a lot harder for a student to actually then try and cheat, and you don't have to worry about that because it takes a lot more to get through this assessment than just your regular fill-in-the-blank multiple choice answers. So when we're thinking about designing authentic assessments, and what does that look like? First, you need to start with your standards. And I've linked here the website that I use as a reference. And at the description part of my YouTube video, you can find the link to this presentation where you can actually then be able to access this material. And this is from John Mueller and his Authentic Assessment Toolbox. And this is what with my main reference here. And he goes through the different steps of what it looks like to be able to design an authentic assessment. And the first thing is the fact that you need to first identify the standards. What is it that I am looking? What is the learning goal here? And they do need to be specific, right? There is something that is mentioned here that the standards need to be something specific. You can't be just a very wide, vague standard. It needs to be specific goals that you're looking for, specific skills or concepts that you are tackling within this particular assessment. From there, the next step is to select a task, right? What kind of task can the student do that would demonstrate that they have understood those specific learning goals, right? So this is where we now kind of have to think about, and there are a lot of examples out there and you can search for, but this is where you try to think about what is an authentic task? What kind of task can a student show me that would demonstrate that they've understood that? Once we have a clear task in mind, then we need to think about what are the characteristics, right? In that task, what characteristics would determine to me from looking at it that this person has understood those goals and have met those goals? And that criteria becomes the basis of what our rubric would be, right? Because that would then be our grading would be based on this rubric, based on these criteria that our students need to meet to demonstrate that their understanding is. This section here on his toolbox for creating a rubric is very good. It kind of goes down the basics of creating a rubric. One thing I will mention about rubric creation is that it does take a lot more finesse and time when you're designing a rubric than sometimes people are aware of. First of all, rubrics should be very specific. When you are designing the criteria, stay away from generalizations of like, this student showed excellent work or anything like that. That's very vague and generalized. It should be very specific. If you were looking for 3 sources of reference, then that's part of your rubric. The student used 3 sources of reference, if that's evident. So be specific with your rubric criteria. And then also take a look at your rubric when you are adding points and when you're putting all of that together and making sure that that point system makes sense. Because if you're looking at a rubric and you have like 3 different categories and you're looking at this this scale, right? That middle category should technically mean that that is what a normal kind of average work, that they've met the minimum criteria of something. They understood it. They might have not gone above and beyond it, but it's met there. So technically, I mean, we could consider that as being, okay, a C, because it's average. If we want to look at it in grading terms, that way, what it would translate into what the figures would be. So you need to make sure that those points, when you're adding it up, really does translate into what would make sense as a letter grade. So you do always have to make sure that you're taking a look at your points that you've designated to your rubric and that it makes sense. I definitely suggest that when you are looking at your rubrics and you've designed it, share it with your colleagues and have someone else look at it to see if it makes sense to them. And rubrics are always kind of like a work in progress. And sometimes you do it and it's not exactly the way that you wanted it to. And so you might end up then changing, parts of your rubric. But there really is a skill in rubric design. And the section in the toolbox that goes through the rubrics and the different types of rubrics that you can create is really great. It's a really great provides a lot of information that can be really useful if designing rubrics is something that you're not completely familiar with or don't feel very confident with just yet. So from these steps, this is the basis for kind of designing your own authentic assessments. And also, there are a lot of examples of authentic assessments out there already. So I definitely encourage you to use your learning communities and use those around you, that you have these goals and you can go, I have these goals that I want to be able to measure my students. What do you think would be a great task? Take a look at what's out there. There's a lot of different educators around that offer a lot of their examples that they've done in class that you can go ahead and take and tweak and design. So don't think that you are alone in this. There's a huge amount of resources out there for you to be able to reference. Another major part about authentic assessments is the fact that they are should allow for reflection and for growth, right? There's throughout the process, since we are stressing the process of learning and then assessing that learning. Throughout that process, students should be periodically stopping and assessing their own growth and starting to reflect on what they've done so far, what they understand, what they need to improve upon. So feedback is really important throughout the authentic assessment, throughout this process, right? It needs to be built into the learning process. It should provide students opportunities for them to be able to identify eventually their own areas of improvement. It builds upon students being able to self-reflect and self-assess. They learn from their feedback. And they learn eventually to go through this process on their own as they're going through the process of learning and as they're going through the process of gathering and meaning making. They are beginning to self-assess and to figure out what I know so far, what do I still don't understand. And so this is really important piece to the authentic assessment and really important that we need to make sure that we are providing these checkpoints throughout the process, that we are able to reflect and to grow within our learning process and within our assessment. I wanted to take some time out to also talk about formative assessments because they also come into this whole idea of the authentic assessment process. The authentic assessment can be thought of as your kind of larger summative assessment because you are assessing a larger concept or standard as a whole. Formative assessments, right, are to monitor the learning process as the students go along. Traditionally, right, these are low stakes, which means they're really not graded. However, you can take formative assessments as kind of a completion grade. The feedback is what's important, But if they're low stakes, it doesn't mean that necessarily does not have to have a grade. You can do it by a completion grade. You can do it by a general grade that students maybe got it wrong, but they can come back to you later and explain to you why they chose that answer. They go back and remediate and figure out, okay, I understand that now. Now I see what's wrong. And that grade can be adjusted. So, I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't assess what's going on in their process. But the feedback is really what's important, and it can be used by instructors to really improve our own teaching because it gives us a clear-cut idea of where our students are. We can differentiate between these students understand this group may still need to work on something specific, and we can then adjust as we need to. And then students learn to improve their own learning, right? Students begin to become self-aware of where they are, what they need help with, and it builds that self-assessment within our students as they start to go through this process. Some examples of what we mean by authentic assessments, and this, of course, by no means is an exhaustive list of everything that's out there, but any types of projects that you do in your class, right, are considered authentic assessments, with students having to gather information that they've been working with, and now they need to apply this information to demonstrate their understanding with some type of project. If you could make students create kind of newscasts or news reports, any kind of oral presentation, right? Anytime our student gives us an answer orally for their understanding of whether it's through an oral presentation that they're doing that's more formal, through discussion questions that they're orally giving to you, whatever it may be, those are authentic assessments. Any types of lab experiments or an experimentation that they're doing when they are reteaching, right? If students are working out problems and they're screencasting themselves and their process of how they worked it out and why they got to that answer, when they're reteaching the class something, if they were in charge of this particular topic and they had to research it and they had to prepare a presentation to teach to the class, right? These are all types of authentic assessments, debates in class, creating podcasts or websites that are informational, any kind of simulations or role playing or skits. If students create tutorial videos for certain things for one another, interviews, creating models, any kind of blogging or journaling that's done. And these are more formal types of journaling because journaling can also be done as a formative assessment if they're kind of quick reflections. Speeches, comic strips, right? Diagrams or layouts that you do like floor plans, any kind of brochures, tours like the Google Tour Builder. If student is in charge of creating a tour for a specific place and all the different places that that a person needs to go and why. So these are all types of authentic assessments. There's something that our students are doing that they are demonstrating and having to apply the information in a new kind of way. There's also a lot of digital tools that can help us with authentic assessment, right? Any kind of our G Suite tools, whether we're talking about slides or docs or sheets or forms, right? These can all be used for authentic assessments. Just like I mentioned, the Google Tour Builder. These are all different tools that we can use to help us. Seesaw that documents what they're doing and they're talking, Storyboard that, where they can build different storyboards and comics. YouTube, in the sense if they're creating tutorial videos or any kind of video, they can then create a whole entire channel and playlist of what they've done. All app is an online whiteboard, so when they need to show you something, they can use that to be able to write on. Screencastify, which we've very familiar with, that we use a lot to be able to screencast our screens and be able to present things on our screens. Flipgrid is great for both authentic assessments, for longer oral presentations, as well as for just short reflective formative assessments as well, depending on your question. Book Creator, they can create online books or handbooks that they've put together. Soundtrap is great for podcasts. And like I mentioned, the Google Tour Builder, right? And these are just some of the most common ones that we've used, but there's a lot of other digital tools out there that you could use at all times. So some example of formative assessments, all right? And these are just check-in points for student learning, right? You're monitoring student learning as they go. So any kind of entry or exit slips, whether you're using it just quick paper Post-it or whether you're using something like a Padlet or a classroom Google question or anything like that. Quick diagrams that your students are creating to see if they understood something, right? Any self-assessment quiz. You might have a self-assessment quiz of where the student is right now, right? And a low-stake pop quiz. You're not really taking those grades like as a high stake. If we have a lot of these same assessments, then really each one is not worth a lot. So they do become low stake if it's something that you then become routine and do in your class. Class discussions can be formative assessments, right? Quick reflection questions that they journal, any kind of graphic organizer that they put together, peer assessments. When you conference the students one-on-one can also be formative assessments. And digital tools that help with that, things like Padlet, Google Forms for quick entry or exit forms, Plickers for within the live class, Seesaw, Nearpod also is great for formative assessments that you can build right into your presentation. Google Classroom has their own questions that you can build in right into Google Classroom, so you could ask it right there. Things like Google Drawing for creating any kind of diagrams or things like that. Flipgrid, Mentimeter, which is another kind of online way to pull your audience when you have a presentation. So that can be used to create word clouds or just like quick answer questions, things like Kahoot. So all of these are different types of digital tools that you can do for this monitoring of where your students are as they're learning. So I hope this kind of session has just made you kind of think of a different way of how we assess and what assessment might really look like in our classroom and what we're really trying to gain. And just because we're assessing in this different way doesn't mean that we're not gathering data. It doesn't mean that we're not gathering information that will help us know where our students are, where they stand, and where we would like them to be and how we can help them continue to be. But one of the great things about authentic assessments, I think, is that it does a better job of allowing students to really demonstrate what they know, and giving them more of an authority and an ownership over their learning. It's giving them more real world opportunities and experiences as to what they need to do to demonstrate themselves. They're learning valuable skills of being able to also learn to manage time, to learn how to gather information and decipher information, being able to make meaning out of that and being able to demonstrate it in a way that other people understand. So I have linked here the toolbox that you can go in and continue to look for additional resources. The toolbox does have some examples. So if you are looking for examples to some authentic assessments by grade or by subject, you can totally find it here. It can give you some examples here. And so, like I said, everywhere there are a lot of educators, whether you're on Twitter, wherever you might be looking at, that you can connect with to look for ideas for authentic assessments, as well as the colleagues around you. And I hope this session has kind of helped you rethink assessments. So thank you for watching.